Here. I'm sure he's here in spirit. So just to briefly introduce myself, yes, I'm Angie. I work on the Deforestation Free Nation campaign at climate change charity Size of Wales. If you're unfamiliar with the Size of Wales, it's a charity that was set up just over 10 years ago with the aim of protecting at least 2 million hectares of tropical forest as part of Wales's response to climate change. We now protect over 4 million hectares of tropical forests in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. And in addition to our forest protection work, we also do policy and advocacy work here in Wales, so really looking at the behaviours that drive deforestation and social impacts overseas. Yes, this is also a little bit depressing for a Friday afternoon, but I promise you it will get better. So just going to have a brief look at global deforestation rates, why forests, tropical forests in particular, are so important in the fight against climate change, and Wales's forest footprint, and what we can do here in Wales to counter these problems. Okay, so Kevin was meant to be doing the first couple of slides, so I'll just sort of do that in my own way. I'm not sure if he's put animations on here or anything. That's probably what has happened. Okay, so yes, the current rate of deforestation. So in 2021, we lost 25.3 million hectares of tropical forest. And that was during a global pandemic when things were far from business as usual. And that's despite the fact that in 2014, governments and organisations around the world came together to commit to halving deforestation by 2020 and ending it by 2030. However, despite that, deforestation rates have actually increased. So globally, deforestation accounts for 20% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is just huge when you compare it to carbon-intensive behaviours like flying, which accounts for just 2.5%. And the majority of deforestation and land conversion, converting land from one use to another, so say, for example, converting a pristine, biodiverse forest habitat into a monoculture soy plantation, most of that is driven by just a handful of agricultural commodities, products we buy, use, and consume in Wales every day. So part of our work is education outreach, and so we like to teach people how they can also cope with some of these things and what they can do here in Wales, not just individually, but as businesses, public sector organisations, and yes, everybody has a role to play. So why do forests matter? These are Kevin's slides, so I'm sure there's going to be something interesting in here. Was there something that just popped up? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so carbon sequestration. Okay, so we all know our forests are crucial in tackling the climate crisis. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, makes it clear that without our forests, we will not keep global warming to 1.5 degrees C, as outlined in the Paris Agreement. So half of all carbon stored in Earth's forests is found in tropical regions. I'm not sure, I'm just going to skip through that bit. Oh, okay. So this is due in part to the dense hardwood trees that exist in tropical forests. So as they're close to the equator, that means 12 months of sunshine, growth, and photosynthesis. Trees store carbon both above ground in their bark, wood, and leaves, and below ground in their roots, trapping carbon deep in the soil. On the forest floor, leaf litter, berries, and twigs decompose, transferring those micronutrients and carbon into the soil. So when we burn down a forest, we not only remove the ability to draw down carbon emissions generated by human activities, such as the burning of fossil fuels and waste from emissions from food waste, that kind of thing, but we're also obviously contributing massively to the nature crisis. And also tropical forests help create cloud cover, which reflects solar radiation back into space. Deforested land, in contrast, absorbs more solar radiation, so increasing global temperatures. Biodiversity. Tropical forests account for just 6% of land mass coverage on Earth, yet hold over 50% of terrestrial plant and animal species. The rich flora and fauna of complex ecosystems with soils, fungi, plants, and animals help to deliver a huge range of ecosystem services that we all benefit from. Provisional services such as shelter, food, and medicine, regulating services, clean air, water, climate regulation, and cultural services as well, such as or spiritual enrichment. Okay, and indigenous peoples. So indigenous peoples have been safeguarding biodiverse forest habitats for thousands of years, stewarding and respecting the land, rivers, plants, and animals. In fact, forests protected by indigenous peoples are capable of storing more carbon and more biodiversity than those unprotected, yet they face increasing threats to their livelihoods, forests, and cultures. Also, health. So we've just come through, we're still in a global pandemic, and forests can help provide a buffer between humans and wildlife, helping to massively reduce the risk of sparking another global pandemic. And also, 25% of Western medicines come from plants found in tropical forests. And that includes 75% of the plants that have anti-cancer characteristics. There's one flower called the Madagascan periwinkle, and that has helped to increase the likelihood of surviving childhood leukemia from 10% to 90%. It's currently under risk from deforestation in its native habitat. So these are some of the reasons why it's so crucial that we end deforestation, we all work together, and what you're doing here today is really inspiring. So thank you very much for sharing everything that's going on in Wales. Okay, so these are my slides. Okay, so what's driving deforestation and land conversion? So 75% of deforestation is caused by just a handful of agricultural products, including imported beef. So the UK is the 5th largest importer of Brazilian beef. And soy, 80 to 90% of soy is used to feed livestock in the UK. So we call this embedded soy, the soy we consume through the consumption of animals reared on a diet of soy. I'm sure you all know many of the issues surrounding palm oil, so I won't go too much into that. And chocolate production as well is also linked to social impacts and deforestation. Social impacts include forced and child labour. And coffee, yes, the second most traded commodity in the world after crude oil. Okay, so in COP26 last year in Glasgow, we published our Wales and Global Responsibility Report, which we produced with WWF Cymru and RSPB Cymru. And it showed for the first time Wales's overseas footprint for the main forest risk commodities. So what did we find? We found an area 40% the size of Wales is required to grow Welsh imports of cocoa, palm, beef, leather, natural rubber, soy, timber, paper, and pulp every year. 30% of these come from regions classed as high or very high risk for deforestation, habitat conversion, and social issues, such as the abuse of indigenous rights. Welsh livestock consumes nearly 80% of Wales's soy imports and over 50% of our palm oil imports. And we also found, interestingly, that we consume more corned beef in Wales than the rest of the UK. Just an interesting fact to discover. And most corned beef comes from Brazil or Argentina, so you can guarantee nearly all of that corned beef is linked to tropical deforestation and habitat conversion. Okay, so what can we do? Well, thankfully, you'll be pleased to hear most of what's been talked about here today is really going to help protect tropical forests as well as improve diets and our local environment here in Wales. So I won't go too much into these because they've already been mentioned in quite a lot of detail, but I've included some of the certifications down here that can really help. For example, I'll give the example of a beef cow, actually. So if we look at, even if you take away the certifications, so it's not 100% grass-fed, it's not Soil Association organic, for the majority of the time in Wales or the UK, cattle that are raised here, they live on a diet of pasture. They may be supplemented with soy, which may be linked to deforestation in the Amazon or elsewhere. But their diet mainly consists of pasture and then supplemented with soy. If you compare that footprint to beef cattle that's been raised on deforested land in Brazil or Argentina, and it's also been fed with crops that have been grown on deforested land, you can see there's a real imbalance there. So even without the certifications, we could really reduce our forest footprint by buying locally reared beef. And also, we've got some other certifications down here. Which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. You're probably wondering why there's fish ones in there. But actually, as I said, much soy and palm is used to feed animals in the UK, including farmed fish. So if you do buy farmed fish, I'd go for the ASC standard, or buy MSC certified, as it's they feed themselves. Okay, and one of the big things that we can do as well is looking at where our money is. There's a huge amount of investment from banks, pension pots, insurance that's actually connected to deforestation and social impacts overseas. So this is something we can really do to address our impact. And what I'm really here to talk to you about, instead of just lecturing you, as I feel I'm preaching to the converted, is having a look at what we have coming up this year. So as part of our work, we've been developing toolkits to support the public sector and also businesses to help them reduce their forest footprint. And this year, we've got some funding from the Co-op Carbon Innovation Fund, and we're going to be rolling out this communities pilot. Two of which are sort of networks. So one will be a farming network. We've already started working with the NFU, FUW, various farms and growers around Wales on sustainable animal feed and alternatives. And our schools network as well, which will be utilising our army of education outreach officers and schools that we've worked with in the past through our climate change education programme, and really trying to make connections between farms, what's being produced on the ground, and linking it to schools, like very much inspired by the work that's been done in Scotland. And we have a geographically located community pilot. And this is going to be looking at Monmouthshire in particular, so if there is anybody here from Monmouthshire, I'd be really keen to hear from you. And that will be working with local authorities, community groups, schools, businesses to support behaviour change. So please do get in contact if you're interested in working with us. And this is just a bit of a snapshot of our deforestation-free business toolkit. This is being published next week, actually. So we really wanted to, it's challenging, you know, a lot of these things are really systemic, and it's very difficult for businesses to look through their supply chains and see where these impacts are happening. That's where certification can help, but it's not the only answer. So we've really tried to kind of guide people and give them all the information that they need, and support them to reduce their forest impact if they're a food business, for example, but there's also other commodities which are impacting forests, of course, like timber, paper, and pulp. And so there's lots of questions in there about supplier engagement and free, prior, and informed consent around products that come from indigenous lands. And so, yeah, we're launching this next week on Tuesday, which is quite exciting. It's a culmination of a lot of work. And so if you're interested in joining that event, then please do. If you're a business that would like to reduce their forest footprint, then let me know. And that's a really quick run through. So thank you. It's a bit chaotic, sorry. My train is arriving quite shortly, so I'm rushing a little bit. But if anyone has any questions, please do ask. I think I've got a few minutes.
Any questions for Angie?
Oh, God.
Hand went straight up at the front.
I don't like to disappoint. Thank you. That was really quite shocking, wasn't it? Some of those facts and figures. So, I mean, the first question is how you don't despair when you see people like Bolsonaro making decisions on deforestation in Brazil. And I absolutely agree that we in Wales have to do our bit to reduce our demand for whether it's Brazilian beef or palm oil or whatever else. And ultimately that, if other countries do something similar, it'll reduce the demand for these products and it'll slow down deforestation. But it's often been said that if we really want to address deforestation in places like rainforests, the local population, the communities and people need to achieve economic sustainability if they're going to seriously address their own environmental challenges. So they're comments really more than questions.
Yeah, so we work with Indigenous groups on the ground through many of our forest programs, and we see firsthand the impacts that they're experiencing. And it is really shocking when you speak to people from, for example, the Guarani in Brazil or the Wampis in Peru. Their lives are under threat. They're surrounded by palm oil soy plantations, pastures for grazing cattle. The villages are often sprayed with pesticides. They're getting sick. Their lands are polluted. So yeah, it is quite challenging, but what we have to do is help raise their voices and really give them international support. You know, there's a really big thing happening at the moment. The 1Ps in Peru have a state of emergency, and I only knew about this through my job, but I looked online and there was literally nothing. Nobody was talking about it. And this is the kind of thing that we need to really give voice to help support them. And also, you know, there's a lot of really good reasons why businesses, apart from the ethical stuff, you know, there's a lot of legislation that's coming in now with due diligence legislation in the UK, EU due diligence legislation, which is going to really make businesses look at the commodities that they're purchasing and the kinds of impacts that they're having overseas. So yes, it is challenging, but I think that's what we can all do, is really just try and platform their voices and give them as much support as we can. And obviously, it's not just about the individual here to make changes. It's not just about individual businesses to make changes. We have to also engage in civic action as much as possible and really try and advocate and support them. Yeah, I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie.
Thank you. Hate public speaking, by the way.